The Cyber Minutes podcast is for educational purposes only. The views expressed by hosts and guests are their own, not necessarily their employers. Advice discussed is general advice. We promote ethical discussions, not illegal activities. Listen responsibly. Well, g'day everyone, and welcome back to the Cyber Minutes podcast. My name's Max, and I'm joined by Flynn and our special guest today, Kirwin. Good to see you.
Hello. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, so Kirwin's our, I'd say, first big hacking guest. Hopefully one of many, and hopefully a returning guest. We'll see. Do you want to just give us an introduction of yourself?
Hi,
I'm Kirwin. I'm a junior penetration tester. I've been obsessed with all things cybersecurity for a long time. I'm happy to talk about anything and everything in between. Maybe except reverse engineering. Still getting there for that regard. But yeah, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
And when Kirwin says he's still getting there, that means he's probably 10 years above me and Max.
Yeah, probably at least.
Yeah.
No, I've met some very, very talented people. Like each hacker kind of has their own specialization. And I know there's one bloke, he's like a 16, 17-year-old hacker. I think his name's Ryan. I'm not a hacksaw, but he's some 16-year-old. But he's got something like 20 0 days in his name. And he's exploited everything and anything under the sun. And he's done some fascinating work. So compared to some blokes, I'm absolutely nothing.
There's always a bigger fish.
Yeah.
And especially in hacking, it's very humbling when the bigger fish is always like someone younger than you.
Absolutely. But no, it's endearing, especially when they're willing to impart their knowledge. And I think cybersecurity is fantastic in that sense that like a lot of people are really, really willing to share what they've learned and are really excited to do that. And not many other spaces, I reckon, are the same in that regard. But at the same time, there certainly are gatekeepers in this field.
Like everywhere.
Yeah, but it's good to find like someone who's hyper knowledgeable on a particular subject that you're interested in learning, and that are just super willing to like impart that knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's a thing once you're in the community, it's really easy to connect with people and talk to people about different stuff. But maybe getting in there to start with can be difficult.
Lots of conferences as well you can go to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, have you guys been on many conferences? Like there's like OWASP talks, the SEC talks. There's a ton in Sydney specifically.
Flynn and I, just me. I went to, were you there? B-Sides?
B-Sides, yeah. I've been to B-Sides as well.
So yeah, I went to B-Sides in Sydney, not in Canberra. I heard the Canberra one's really good. But the Sydney one had some really good parts about it. Good perks going there. There was a CTF, I didn't really get to check it out, but that was run by same people who ran the CTF at HackMac.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah, there's heaps of stuff to do in Sydney, so it's cool. Kirwin, could you tell us a little bit about your current job and what are some of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis? Obviously you don't have to reveal too much about it.
Oh, no, absolutely. So I've just left probably one of the greatest security companies I've ever been with, a company called Devon. I'm now looking at a different role at CyberCX, but I'd love to talk about some of the work that we've done there. It's super, super fun, super fascinating. The founder, Jameson O'Reilly, probably one of the best hackers you'll ever stumble across. We mainly specialize in web application, I should say, specialize in web application pen testing. We do work like web application pen testing, mobile application pen testing, API testing, which is a little bit, I call mobile applications more of like a wrapper for an API.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of one and the same. Like if you're good at web applications, you're likely going to be good at both iOS and iOS is actually a bit different. So I'll leave that, but it's very, very similar kind of work.
Yeah.
That's clouds. We've done physical pen testing, hardware hacking. We've hacked. Let me think about some of the things we can actually speak about. That's right. I want to talk about at some stage pwning over 20 different cloud environments from one server, and I'll tell the story of that, how that happened. And that's a very fun story, and that's a long one. So let me know if we want to dive into that now or later.
Cool. Maybe in just a sec. So, Kirwin, you started in cybersecurity from quite a young age compared to most of us. What drove you to cyber as a career, and what gauged your interest when you were really young?
Yeah, so I have a big cheeker in that regard. I got super, super fortunate with my parents. So both my parents work in IT. In fact, the reason I'm here in Australia is because my father got a senior position at Google. So he's an engineer there. My mother also works in tech. And so from a very, very young age, I was born and lived in South Africa, and he was also doing security work at a company called SensePost. Now, at the time, they're quite small, but now they're actually quite a large company. I'm trying to recall one of the widely used tools. It's for iOS hacking. Trying to remember the name of it. If I find it, if I remember, I'll let you know. But they're now quite a large company, and so I remember being in the offices when I was like 5, 6 years old, a child, and like being exposed to the kind of work they were doing. So I always knew like what a hacker was, but like not what they do or how to do it. So like I'd always had that implant in the back of my mind. And so, skip a bunch, we're not going to talk about all these travels. Now living in Australia, I'm going to high school, so year 7. And year 7, I already, I'd learned, my father tried teaching me HTML, but that failed when I was super young. So I had some exposure to some like languages. HTML is a markup language, so I'm not going to call it programming language. At a very young age, moving on, yada yada yada. At year 7, we were given Macs, and my father told me you should put Linux on it. And so that's what I did. So I played around. I think he told me to use like Ubuntu, and I really didn't like Ubuntu for some reason. I still don't. It's a very stable distro, but for me, when I was, so actually, I'll say ages instead of year 7 and whatnot. So I would have been around 13 years of age when I started using Linux.
Yeah.
That was dual booting on a 2013 MacBook Pro, which was like an Intel-based system. So I also had Windows, Mac, and Linux all partitioned on the same device.
Wow.
And I was an absolute little shit at my high school. Like, I have some very fun stories in that regard. See, I started young. I was exposed to it young. My father worked at a security firm with pen tester. He's a software engineer by trade.
Yeah.
So he's developed and built all these tools. And I've been really exposed to like the technological side of things from really, really early on. So I'm lucky in that regard. But it doesn't make me anything special at all. Like, it's just I started earlier, so I have more time to obtain that knowledge. Anybody else can do what I did. Anybody else can learn what I did. It's really nothing spectacular.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned that you were a bit of a nuisance when you got those Linux, all those boots set up on the same device. Can you give us an example?
Oh, absolutely. There's so many fun stories. So I'll give some context. So I was best friends with the guys in IT. So they're not technically teachers. So funnily enough, you're not really allowed to be in the same room with them, legally speaking. Every recess and lunch, I'd hang out with these guys and I would show them some tools I was running. And there was stuff like the low orbiting ion cannon.
Yes.
So all DOS.
Classic anonymous tool.
Dude, I have a fun story with that. I'll say that one later, but I'll say my favorite story. There was a tool called Kick Them Out, and you can find it on GitHub. I think it's a version 2 now. Now, this tool, it's fantastic. It does a few things. So our network was pretty poorly built. Like, it wasn't segmented. So regardless of what room you're in, anywhere in the school, you can access or reach someone else on the network.
Yep.
And I'll explain why that's fun. In certain classes that I didn't like, and particularly geography, we had a pretty technologically illiterate teacher, but they heavily relied on the devices. Like, all our work was on hey, I'm going to fetch these questions that I've written down on Google Drive. What I would do, and what this tool allowed me to do, is it will send a deauthentication frame, not a packet. Packet is outside of a network. In internal networks, it's frames. You spoof your IP as the router's IP. So every frame that is received by every device that receives these frames is going to be like, okay, let me check. Okay, this header here says it's from the router. Let me check. Okay, it looks, and you can also fake you can spoof your MAC address as well. So if it does do that check, like, okay, MAC address and IP header match. This is the router.
Yep.
Because it has no other way to verify what it is, who it is. I think newer networks now manage this, so I haven't validated that myself. But every device was handed to each student, and so the name of the device was the student's MacBook. So it was the student ID. Yeah. For teachers, it was the first and last name.
Okay.
And so I could see an entire index of which teacher had what MAC address and had what IP. So what I would do when this class would start is okay, I really don't want to learn. I don't care for geography. I'm so sorry for those who do. I would kick the teacher off the network.
I thought you got to kick everyone off the network. No,
that happens. I've done that many times, and it worked.
I think you told me quite a while ago about a story where you kicked basically half of New South Wales schools out off a network.
that was with the DOS tool, and I can explain that story. That should not happen. If that happens in
old technology. Obviously, we say old, but it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We're talking about security
early 2010s sort of high school network.
Yeah, that was shocking. So this was with Central with an S. And it was a student system that's used by multiple different schools. Now, I was under the assumption that like each school hosts this software solution locally, like on the instance. Yeah, like on their own network. So it's not like some other companies managing it. So I was like, okay, like this. So Central was used for like telling teachers and students what your next class is, where it is, because at our school it was constantly changing. We went to different classes, yada yada. And of course, a little bit of havoc. I'm like, okay, well, just before the class ends, let me start DOSing Central. That way, I could be late to my class and it wouldn't be an issue. Now, little did I know, and I don't truly to this day understand how this network was configured, why it was done the way it was. I'm sure it could still be validated or might even still be vulnerable. I'd love to find out. But I would DOS central.com and thinking it was my school who was hosting it. I think it was just local. No, it turns out it was quite a large company that the entire Catholic diocese uses. So I wasn't just denying services for my school. I was doing it for the entirety of New South Wales. And how I found this out was, I won't say because I show all my like tools or everything, all my tricks I'm doing to the IT. Because this guy, his name was James Burke, and he's an absolute legend. Love him to this day. He'd be like, "Yeah, it's so cool. I'm curious how that works," and we'll go through the code together and stuff. But one day I was in I think it might have been recess or lunch, one of the two, and I was in the IT labs, and I was showing him like, "Hey, look what I can do." So I do it, and he gets a call immediately after 1 minute of me running this tool and like showing that like Central's down. He gets a call, and he's like, okay, I think I know. Gotcha. Okay, I'm so sorry. Hangs up the phone, immediately turns to me and says, "We can't do that again." And that's when I found out, yeah, it wasn't just my school.
I mean, we say that this was like old school technology, but one node went down with Optus and then crashed the whole thing. It's a bit different, but there's still vulnerable applications to this day.
Yeah, that for me was so disappointing. Honestly, like the stock price falling was deserved. Like the entire basis of the internet is solely to mitigate from that from happening. Like as I was saying previously, like if a node goes down, the routing protocols OPSF, OSPF, open shortest path. It should reroute to the nearest open shortest path. But the entire network going down at once was, for me, just shocking. And all these other engineers that I was speaking to shocked as well. But the one I was saying who was actually working at Optus, they fully deserved it.
And me and Max have been through it a couple of times before. But if you have the proper change management in place, this shouldn't be happening either. Even from just like a bad networking perspective, from a process perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. They should have had a fallback. They should have several fallbacks.
Yeah. So obviously you've had quite a bit of experience attacking applications and organizations. Could you tell us a bit about your process from the start to the beginning, from the beginning to the end of attacking an organization?
Right, more than happy to cover this. This is a fun question. I always like answering. First off, it really depends what the customer wants or comes to us for. Like, if they say, like, hey, we have this one application that we want to pen test for, whether it's a mobile or web or even a cloud environment. But like quite often, I think I'd put the number between like 40 to 60% of our work is we'll have long-term red team engagements with companies that we've worked with for a long, long time. And so we're running like full red team engagements, and like these can last weeks to months, and they're often upwards of months. So like when we're targeting an organization, and I'm going to go around the presumption that like I'm an attacker, I don't have limited scope, I have unlimited scope. Anything that I can get my hands on is free game. I use this brilliant tool by Black Lantern Security called Bbot, and this tool is probably, I would say, the number one tool for not just OSINT. It is quite aggressive, but there's also a passive mode for it, but like just information gathering. Like, for example, like I was looking at some unis that have a open like bounty scopes, so you can look at them legally. One domain name, let's just pick I'm going to quickly use a random example, google.com. Don't test google.com unless you want to get your IP restricted. one domain name, so google.com, come back with 25,000 different hosts, different endpoints, different subdomains, and like the sheer attack surface from that, like I'm guaranteed to win. There will be something. And what often we see is companies don't really manage their assets well. Like they know maybe of like 25, 50 hosts that are there, like recurringly going back to managing, overseeing, assessing, checking, like critical infrastructure, like mail servers or the site, whatever they're looking logs for. But there's a lot of archaic, dead web apps that are always hanging and never looked at, never touched. And often we find like some poor developer from like 8 years ago designed this critical piece of infrastructure, left the company 6 years later, and now the company has Yeah, we see that constantly. Like with the amount of times we've come to the company, like, hey, we have like 800 vulnerable hosts. Here's proof. We have like footholds on 50 of these. We're not going to go further. We can go further, depending on the company's requests. We have and exploited it and using and phishing campaigns. And phishing campaigns with context is an instant win.
I remember even I ran one very simply when I first started, and if my manager pulled me aside and kind of said, like, look, you've made it too complex, you're going to get everybody with it. As soon as you add a bit, one thing I've seen recently as well, it's been happening a lot in the wild, is forwarding chains with our phishing emails. As soon as someone sees forwarded from someone internally, even if it's not the person being compromised, they're just faking it, people just instantly trust it. It's horrible.
So my boss, he has requested that I keep like go-to strategies a little bit download. So I'll speak about the kind of work we're doing, but I won't give specifics. Yeah. But the more business context there is, the easier it is. Like if you have proper names and images of people that work at your company and they're all on this email link, they're gonna trust it. They're gonna likely believe it, especially if it's relevant to what you're working on recently. Like I'll give you an example. Like do you guys know what an idle vulnerability? It's a very easy thing to exploit.
It's not really.
So an idle insecure direct object reference. So like, say you go to I'm going to give you a random example. Let's say you invest and you have a stocks account. So, and you have a profile that shows what you have shares and what you have bought or where you're going to, like, pending on buying. Yep. And let's say that this endpoint is at, let's call it investment.com/1136. Now, your profile is 1136, and it shows all that information. So what happens if you go to 1135?
Okay. Yeah. I've heard of this yet now. Kind of like an
Optus
increment.
Yeah. So do you know,
is it just like edge case stuff, or?
No, it's, so that specific vulnerability is called an idle. I wouldn't really call this an edge case because this is something that's quite common. Depending on the application, it's maybe an issue for someone. It might not be an issue for a finance application like investing. That is a problem. Like if you could see what Warren Buffett's going to buy in 2 weeks, you can exploit that.
Oh,
but like it's like business specific. So for some businesses, they're like, oh, that's fine, that's not really risk, and so they can call it an accepted risk. But for some, they're like, that is absolutely, like, we cannot have that. Yeah. And so we see this a lot. Like if you're going to target a specific application, instead of like looking for like known issues, what we look for is business, like a contextually or business context issues. Like if you can make it a request in your profile, but then change like your ID and the get request or put request, whatever it is, to someone else's, and you can manipulate like their profile. Yeah, that's a critical issue. But that's all API testing, and that's like application specific. Like if you really get nitty and gritty and like do a deep dive on one app, that's what we'll do. But for targeting like an organization, it's just looking at a sheer attack surface, and you are guaranteed to win one day.
Yeah. Awesome. I'll just go back to something you said before. We've spoken in the past about having too much heavy reliance on somebody. That we see it all the time with organizations where they just have spaghetti code because they've done something so many years ago. They've taken shortcuts and nobody knows how to fix it now. Something I see a lot with organizations is they have that heavy reliance on one person and they basically can't do anything else. And it's such a big risk because if that person gets taken out, what do you do? It's horrible.
Yeah, that's something we see really, really often, specifically for like slightly smaller companies. Like we see that a lot in corporations, but I'll explain why it's a bit different. Like a smaller, like let's say like 8 to 20 employees. Like they have the same company or 5 guys or even one person that they go to like develop or set up infrastructure or architecture or something. And what we often see is like there'll be one really good like builder, but they can only build apps and they can't build securely, and they're heavily relying on this builder. And we show time and time again, like this person, like no matter how many times we show this person, like, hey, like if you do this, this is what will happen. Like this is how you can get pwned or exploited, and it's happened. Like they had customer information breached a number of times, and so it's not like it's a small issue. Like if you're actually like repeated failures to even implement the most basic checks, resulting in people having their information leaked, I think that's becoming problematic. And like we'll tell these companies and show these companies like, hey, your employee is like routinely doing these really basic mistakes that's going to cost you a lot of money if you get found and fined and audited.
So, Kirwin, we've kind of already mentioned just before about the state of sort of Australian cybersecurity. Is targeting a corporation, so a big organization, is it often very complex, or would you say organizations are rarely hitting the basics even now?
Yeah. I don't think I've seen a single organization do it right.
Right.
Ever.
Elaborate a little bit.
No matter what company we look at, like it can be, let's go for cloud environments, for example. What I often see, and like I don't blame organizations for this, is organizations like, say, some universities, like, hey, we're now migrating to the cloud from locally deployed infrastructure. We see some like benefits and cost and savings, but we don't know how to build an environment. Let's go use some third party who will create this environment for us. And this has happened a number of times, and I see this constantly. And so we'll go, okay, there's 2 companies that get hired. So my company, the security firm,
yep,
and the second company, the guys who are developing the infrastructure. And the university doesn't have a clue on how to develop a cloud environment or deploy a cloud environment, what they need to do, all these policies, yada, yada. They just have requirements. Like it needs to be able to hold say, 800,000 records. In fact, it's likely a lot more than that. When I say records, I mean like people's records, like information. And what we see is like this third party that is like the main responsibility of these guys is to deploy cloud environments to the customer's request. But what we see is they use default roles, policies, and like setup configurations, and they're not even hitting the Azure or AWS or GCP security minimum requirement, like not requirements, like recommendations. Like they're not even hitting the basics. And it's like, how can you expect a company to have a secure environment when the ones who are building their environments don't know how to do it securely?
Yeah. Would you say this is a global problem, or do you think this is more Australia focused?
See, that's a bit of a difficult one because from my experience so far, it's a global problem. But I will say that the customers that we're typically working with, which are primarily government, are in Australia. So I haven't got too much experience with other countries. Like we don't test American infrastructure or companies or whatnot. The UAE, for example, we've done a lot of our customers are in the UAE because they belong to like very large corporations that we work with.
Yep. And
I would say they're probably even worse. It's funny that they're worse off in Australia, but their laws are far more stringent. Like the UAE law, if you have a photograph that's leaked and there's a name associated with the person in that photograph, that is a data breach. If you witness that information, the name, middle name, and last name, that is a data breach. If I see that information and I don't report it appropriately, or I wasn't supposed to see it, that's 5 years imprisonment for me. Now, we were supposed to go to the UAE, so we thought, like, we'll look at the laws first. And then we saw that, and we're like, ooh, okay. And even, like, if a proper, like, audited, like, security firm that comes in and does a test for these guys, even then, they can potentially face imprisonment. So the UAE is a bit stringent in those laws, but that's the extent.
They pay all right, don't they?
I think it's often the case where you get these rapidly developing countries that they kind of do have those vulnerabilities, just in terms of environments as well. I think it's the same with Australia. Like, America's kind of been slowly progressing over the years, whereas Australia's kind of not given a shit until 5 years ago. And they're like, hey, let's get everything done.
Yeah.
I think that's where you find a lot of big problems.
Absolutely.
And I might reverse the question a little bit. So what are some strategies that businesses can put in place that can make it so hitting the basics are a little bit easier?
Okay, I'll I'll happily respond to this, and I'll start with this. It really depends on the nature of the company. Like, what kind of information are you handling? If you're handling medical information or like a credit card information, PCL, like you have different frameworks you need to abide by. You have different standards that you're held to. If you're a small boutique flower store and all you need is a static website, you don't need to have the most like sophisticated, latest, I was going to say Okta authentication, and you don't need that kind of level of security.
No.
But if you're a large corporation, like, and you can afford it, I'm gonna speak in the regard that it's like, if we want to go, I'm going to talk about maximum security, or would you like rather us talk about like
maybe not just hitting the basics?
Yeah, I think it's just perfect because you know we've said it before as well. Just knowing your information assets and knowing your environment is number one. But continue.
Yes, okay. So hitting the basics, all right, that's pretty easy. My basics might be a bit different from others, but work devices. I don't trust. I don't rely on bringing your own devices. These should be managed devices. So if you want, like, I'm not a big Mac fanboy, but I will say when it comes to like enterprise security, if you want like something that's quick and easy to manage, something like through Kanji, Macs are great. Yeah, exactly. So you give users these devices, could be cheap, but they have just user profiles. They do not have administrator functionality or any permissions like that. They're limited in scope. So when they have like Google Chrome, say it's the only browser, they can't use personal profiles. It's strictly work. Everything is segmented. Like every single application has to have MFA. Like I'm talking about email. I'm talking about anytime you sign into work. We typically recommend like a session expiry every 3,600 seconds, which is roughly an hour. And so these guys, we're often seeing companies just not even hitting like fundamentals like password policies, right?
Yeah.
NIST, I think the NIST guidelines is 90 days you should rotate your password, and I think it's now changed. Like I personally would recommend anything over 12. I typically use passphrases.
Yeah.
That's my go-to. That's my recommendation. But we're seeing like companies that like root account for their cloud environment doesn't even have MFA enabled. Like that's shocking for me.
Yeah.
The MFA is such like a common one where, in my opinion, if you have MFA enabled, you're stopping so many different attacks. It's such like a basic thing that, and obviously a lot of companies are going to have BYOD because, COVID, remote work, it's just standard nowadays. But, if you have that MFA, it's just such an easy thing to set up and it stops so many attacks.
It does so much. I think like if you go into the Zoom profile, one of the stats they say is like MFA stops 99% of all attacks. And I think it stops all the low hanging fruit, all the easy attacks, but I wouldn't say and I'll tell you why, that's not inherently like perfectly secure. We have exploited many people that have MFA, 2FA enabled. It's called session hijacking. So I'm sure you've heard, like if you find, let's theoretically, if you find some vulnerable web application that doesn't have CRSF tokens configured appropriately, or I'm trying to remember the actual header names, like same site cookies, yada, say that was just poorly configured. So like if you can get an XSS and an administrator views it on like through logs or something, you can snag all of the like session tokens, which is like the typical token that we seem to hijack is like a JWT, which is like a JSON web token, and or either that or authorization bearer token. Like it's like that's how they authenticate, right? Like once you authenticate, that's what gets generated. So every time like you have persistent sessions until that expires.
Yeah.
What we often find is the number one exploit that we find is there is another token that you can use to refresh. It's called an expired token, or I think it's expired token. Let's put an asterisk on that.
Sounds
good. Yeah, you can use that to keep regenerating like a proper token. And so I have perpetual sessions. Once I get your cookie, so there are strategies to mitigate that, but MFA isn't infallible. We've exploited it dozens of times. Like even tools like this, you can pull this off on GitHub, but it won't work. Or I'll tell you. No, I won't tell you why. It's called Evil Nginx or Evil Jinx, if you will. I think there's some Slavic, like I'm trying to remember this name. I can't recall. Fantastic tool. It's like an in-browser tool. It's on GitHub, and you can. How would I describe it? Like it smells like a man-in-the-middle attack, right? Except there's really no middle where it's just like passed through your domain straight to Gmail. So imagine like you send in a link that's like gmail.com, right? They go to it. All communication that gets passed through, it goes straight to Gmail, but it's through me at Gmail. And I can see crits. Yeah, that's it. That's it right there. That's the tool.
Thanks for listening. Just a reminder that the Cyber Minutes podcast is for educational purposes only. The views expressed by hosts and guests are their own, not necessarily their employers. Advice discussed is general advice. We promote ethical discussions, not illegal activities. Have a cybersecurity question? Send an email to cyberminutespodcast@gmail.com, as we'd love to answer it. Stay cyber safe.